So I'm just going to turn the recording on just so we have this for prosperity for our records. All right, thank you so much for joining us all this evening here. This is December 10th. Oh no, December 3rd. I'm just jumping a week ahead already. I'm already into Christmas mode. Gosh, this is what happens on December. Welcome to Global Lawyers of Canada Virtual Mentor Office Hours this week. And today's guest is Leanne Goldstein. And Leanne is an internationally trained lawyer. And she's also a partner at MK Disability Law LLP in Toronto, Ontario. And we're very, very excited to have Leanne joining us tonight. She has been talking with me for months now about coming on board, and today we finally get to have her here and to tell us a little bit about her journey to the Canadian bar and also how she got into disability law, which is an area of law I know very little about, and I'm really excited to learn a bit more about it. So Leanne, why don't you tell us about your journey, please?
Sure, and it's a little bit of a long story, but hopefully you guys will bear with me as I kind of take you through the process from the beginning, which kind of starts many years ago. I was a young child living in South Africa, and I was in the early stages of my childhood living on a farm. So, you know, I know there are a lot of Canadians that do live on farms or know people who live on farms, but it is a very unique lifestyle. And it is rather idyllic, actually, to be honest. And what was, you know, different for me living on a farm versus living in sort of the city was that I was largely insulated from the chaos that was experienced by many in South Africa at the time. When I was about 6 years old, I moved to the city, and although I was still, you know, largely naive as to what was going on, I started to catch some glimpses of, you know, of the reality of the world that I was living in. And my parents, you know, they had moved to the city largely for work, and they were working full-time outside of the house. And so they hired a nanny to assist them in caring for myself and my brother. And to be honest, you know, we knew very little about our nanny. We knew that she had left her own children to take care of my brother and I. And frankly speaking, you know, looking back on that and understanding what a massive sacrifice that must have been for her at the time, I'm somewhat astounded by that whole understanding. So one Monday morning at about 4 o'clock in the morning, our telephone rang. And, you know, in those days we didn't have cell phones, so it was a landline. And I overheard a muffled conversation that was going on. My dad, who actually speaks multiple African languages, was conversing with someone over the telephone in Zulu, which is an African language. And he was somewhat anxious in the conversation. And, you know, a few moments later, he sort of asked me to, you know, put on a sweater and hurry into the vehicle because we had to go somewhere. And he explained that our nanny had forgotten her passbook and that we needed to help her. And so we drove to what was essentially a detention center. And I observed my father negotiating with the officials in charge in order to secure our nanny's release. So what had essentially happened was she had gone home for the weekend. And at about 3 o'clock on Monday morning, she'd started her 2-hour journey to our home because she always wanted to get there early to make sure everything was, you know, ready for the upcoming week. She had forgotten her passbook and she had been arrested and was unable to produce it when she was requested to do so by the police officer. So I don't know if you guys know anything about the pass laws that existed in South Africa, but basically the pass laws were introduced to curb freedom of movement for individuals who were designated as non-white. I use that term because it was a term that was used by the government at the time. And initially the laws were, applied only sort of to men, but then in about the 1950s, the system was extended to women. And thank goodness the system was abolished in the 80s. But basically I watched in abject horror as our nanny, you know, who was sort of desperate, embarrassed, dejected, was extracted from a detention center and ushered into our vehicle. And, you know, rather than expressing anger at sort of this grave injustice that had been perpetrated against her, she actually spent most of the ride home apologizing profusely to my father for having woken him up so early in the morning, which, you know, if you think about it, is just so beyond awful. And, you know, I recognize that as a white South African, my observations come from a very sort of different place. And then I never really truly comprehend the experiences of those who lived through the atrocities of apartheid. But it was honestly the observations that I had, even as a young child, that propelled my desire to essentially pursue a career in law. So that was the beginning. And then in 1996, I was completing my LLB at the University of the Witwatersrand, which is Nelson Mandela's alma mater. And at that time, I was a member of the Students for Human Rights, which was a student organization that modeled itself on Lawyers for Human Rights. You guys may have heard of that. It's a nonprofit, non-governmental human rights organization. It was started by a group of activist lawyers in about 1979. And I was given the opportunity when I was a student to act as a statement taker and a data capturer for the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. So I don't know, I know you know perhaps about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in Canada. You may have some knowledge of that, but there was also a Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa. And I was extremely fortunate to be able to play a very small part in that process. Now, looking back, I realized the sheer enormity of the responsibility of, recording someone else's trauma and someone else's lived experiences. And honestly, I didn't quite recognize what I was doing, but essentially I was recording evidence for individuals who were sort of testifying for the very first time and disclosing, experiences of gross human rights violations that they had never disclosed to anybody else. And I remember being, vividly, remember being woefully unprepared for the experience. But really it was a pivotal experience for me. And I think it was that moment in time that sort of said, I said to myself, I could no longer justify living in a country that had encouraged a regime that, so blatantly disregarded human rights. And I just felt that I could not see this country transitioning beyond its past, even though there have been changes that have been made, which is wonderful to see. But at the time, when I was making decisions, to me, the country sort of remained entrenched in a racist ideology, and there seemed to be no end to the sort of perpetuation of social and economic inequality. And it was really then that my experiences at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission that cemented my desire to leave the country. And as a result, I put in my immigration papers for Canada. So almost, 20 years to the day, actually. So I arrived in Canada in November of 2000, late November of 2000. So honestly, almost 20 years to the day. And it's quite astounding to think that 20 years have passed. Now, when I arrived in Canada, I was a qualified lawyer. So I had completed my schooling in South Africa. I had done my articling and I had completed my board exam. In South Africa, we refer to it as a board exam. I know some countries do. Here, obviously, it's a bar exam. I had already started to practice as an associate at that time. And honestly, my departure at that time was truly bittersweet. I had been working at a large national firm. The firm is now sort of part of the international conglomerate known as Norton Rose, and I'm sure a lot of you know about that firm. But basically, I think it's somewhat similar in the UK, but we sort of had rotations during our articling system, and I had sort of successfully rotated through 4 cycles, and I had been offered a position with the insurance partner at the firm that everybody wanted to work for. And, honestly, at the time, I was on a partnership track whereby, within 4 or 5 years, I would have been a partner at the firm. So honestly, thinking about it now, a partner before the age of 30 at a large international law firm, I'm sure you're all thinking like, what more could you want, right? Well, it was not to be, because shortly thereafter, I sort of find myself writing to the National Committee on Accreditation in order to begin my accreditation process. So like I'm sure many of you, after arriving in Canada, I found myself juggling competing demands. I had received notification from the NCA that I had to write 10 examinations, which was shocking to me at the time. I was astounded because I thought, oh my God, you know, it's like I have to go back to university. This is ridiculous. And I remember writing an appeal, and I remember receiving a letter back from, you know, the head of the committee, who sort of said, be grateful you don't have to go back to university and you can actually do this via correspondence. And I remember thinking, wow, you know, this is really, really crazy. I'm basically doing this all, you know, all over again. And so also at the time, obviously, you know, coming to a new country, as we discussed, Janet, you know, it's very expensive. You know, the conversion rate from rands, which is the South African currency, to dollars was ridiculous at the time. It's more ridiculous now, but it was ridiculous at the time. And doing the NCA examinations, it was expensive. It cost a lot of money, 10 examinations. It was a costly process. And so I had decided that I had to find a job. And how it worked was really sort of between working and studying for the next 16 months. I barely saw my poor husband that I had been married to for 6 months before leaving for Canada. But honestly, that being said, I was very relieved to be working, because finding a job had been incredibly difficult when I first arrived in Canada, much to my surprise. So, you know, 20 years ago, when I first arrived in Canada, there were not as many, you know, new immigrants in the country. It was not, you know, that common. And honestly, as a new immigrant, I was an unknown quotient. I couldn't work as a lawyer yet because I wasn't qualified. And so I basically was looking for a position as a legal assistant or as a law clerk. And what I found continuously in the interviews was that I was asked, first, you know, what is your Canadian experience? And then I was asked, what are your future plans? Well, as soon as I mentioned that I wanted to become a lawyer, the conversation ended, because no one wanted to hire and train a law clerk or a legal assistant who would be leaving, you know, the position as soon as they qualified. And then, you know, every interview I went to, I was asked, you know, what is your Canadian experience? But honestly, what a ridiculous question. How could I possibly have Canadian experience? I had just arrived in Canada. So eventually I figured out, you know, what approach should I adopt here? How am I going to find this job? And really what I did was kind of focus on the value that I could add to the company despite the lack of specific experiences. And so what I did was really sort of try to focus on the attributes that would make me a good candidate for the position. So every time I was asked, you know, what is your Canadian experience? What are your future plans? You know, what can you add to this position? I would sort of reframe the conversation from, you know, instead of talking about my lack of specific experience, I would move that to sort of talking about what made me ideal for the position, right? So really, if you think about it, just the fact that you've left your home country, you've moved to a new country, suggests that you have, you know, so many positive attributes that would be appealing to an employer. Perseverance, you know, tenacity, flexibility, resilience, like the list goes on and on. And so, you know, eventually I realized, instead of answering the question, well, I have no Canadian experience, I would sort of answer the question, well, this is the experience I do have, and these are the attributes I do have that would make me an ideal candidate for this position. So I figured out eventually how to change the conversation. And so eventually I did find a job, and I was very fortunate. Then after completing my NCA, I had to move on, obviously, to the articling process and then to the bar exam, which, you know, again, was kind of surprising to me, because here I was, you know, a qualified lawyer, and I'm having to do this all over again. But, you know, that was the requirement. And so I embraced that, and, you know, I had to do it. And so at the time that I was looking for a place to complete my articles, 20 years ago, there was something called the matching process. And I don't know if you guys have experienced that or if you know anything about that process, but honestly, um, I am still not 100% sure how it all worked. But basically, you would sort of get wined and dined by several large, Bay Street law firms, and you would then have to be matched with these law firms. And I remember sort of attending these, magnificent venues like the Rosewater Supper Club, like places I had never seen in my whole entire life that I'd never experienced before. And I was making small talk with, potential articling candidates and associates and partners, at various firms. And it happened that I received several invitations to lunch with partners of various firms, which, I didn't really know was essentially an informal interview. And what I also did not know was that there was some sort of code whereby, when you were having this lunch, you would be communicating to the partners that you were interested in working with them and working for their law firm. Because generally speaking, like, law firms were not interested in wasting their time on candidates that, were not expressing an interest in working with them. So, while the law firms were trying to find out my level of interest in working for them, I was sort of naively explaining that, yes, I'm meeting with several law firms and I'm sort of trying to find the best fit for me. Oh my goodness, that was the worst thing that I could have said. And honestly, like, looking back, I realized that, my thought process was actually governed by my life experience at that time. Because living in a country and attending a law school, in that country provides you with a distinct advantage. When you're interviewing for positions, the interviewer is familiar with your education level. They are familiar with your expertise and your experience, and they have a frame of reference for you. You have networks, you have connections, you understand cultural nuances. So, in South Africa, I had been offered several opportunities after completing my studies. And frankly, I had the ability to sort of pick where I wanted to complete my articles. And I thought that the experience in Canada would be the same. But what I didn't realize was that I was competing with thousands of other candidates. Those candidates, had attended school in Canada. They had connections, they had networks, they knew how the system worked, and they knew the code, which I was completely clueless about. So honestly, truth be told, I was devastated when I did not end up with an articling position at a Bay Street firm. And, in my own mind, I'd sort of been conditioned to believe that in order to be successful, you have to work at a large international firm or a large national firm. And honestly, Bay Street firms are wonderful, fantastic experiences to have, but there are so many opportunities and options out there that exist beyond big law. And so I ended up completing my articles, which I did, in an abridged format at the firm that I had started clerking with, or I was working as an assistant at. But I remained determined to land a Bay Street job, and I continued in that process, and eventually I did. So after completing my articles, I began working at, on Bay Street at a very successful personal injury firm. And oh my goodness, it was a steep learning curve. I did not know much, and I was thrown into the fire. I remember on my first day, I was required to attend a contested motion, and I had never done that before. And I remember that the partner had, given me this file, and she had gone on maternity leave, and it was what we call sort of an undertakings motion. Some of you may be familiar with that, some of you may not be. And basically what had happened was the partner had not complied with any of the undertakings. And I attended the motion with one of the most sort of notorious masters, who was incredibly difficult. And basically during that motion, she absolutely yelled at me when I suggested that the reason that the undertakings were not completed was because the partner had gone off on maternity leave. And she yelled about the fact that it was no excuse, And I'm laughing because somebody has mentioned a master and you have the correct master. But basically what happened was this particular master was very unimpressed with the whole situation. And I ended up with a cost award. And I also ended up with an endorsement that basically said, you know, once again, this firm is failing to comply with undertakings, which was absolutely atrocious. And I was, again, devastated. And I went back to the partner who ended up laughing. And I said, why are you laughing? This is awful. And she sort of said, oh my goodness, you did so well. We knew that, you know, this was going to be the motion from hell, and it was a trial by fire, and you actually did way better than we expected you to. So congratulations. And so honestly, you know, it was an extreme learning curve. It was an amazing experience. I relished every opportunity to grow and to learn. And, you know, although at the end of the day, it was extremely intense. I felt that it shaped me as a lawyer. It helped me to learn very quickly how to practice law in Ontario. It taught me about the court systems. I mean, I remember there were days where I was running between 4 courts during trial scheduling court and call over court, where you would speak to matters, and I would have 50 matters on the list. And I would appear before the judge, who would go, yes, Ms. Goldstein, which numbers are you on today? And I would go, you know, 21, 62, 45. And I go, Your Honor, could I speak to all of these matters together? And, you know, he would sort of say yes, or she would say yes. And then I would be able to sort of address the difficulty of running from one courtroom to the next. But honestly, after working 7 days a week, 17 hours a day for sort of 2 years straight, I felt a lot like, you know, Sisyphus pushing that boulder up the hill and, you know, getting to the point where I was finally there and then rolling all the way down again. So I realized at that point that, you know, the rest of my life was suffering, and I had to make a decision to make a change. So again, another bittersweet moment, but a necessary pivot, because sometimes it's about more than you know, career advancement. It's about more than working 17 hours a day, 7 days a week. So now that I had the sought after sort of Canadian experience, I was kind of able to examine a little more carefully the path that I wanted to follow in my career. So by this point, I had worked as a defense lawyer, I had worked as a plaintiff's lawyer, I had worked in a small general practice, a large national practice, Bay Street firm, you know, a suburban firm. I had done personal injury work, employment and labor, professional malpractice, real estate, commercial litigation, blah, 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 right? So, you know, I've often been asked, like over the years by people that I have mentored, you know, how did you decide on the path that you wanted to follow? Like, what spoke to you? Like, how was it that you reached the conclusion that you wanted to become a disability lawyer? And it really, honestly, it came down to sort of examining the reasons why I chose to become a lawyer in the first place. And kind of, that sounds like so obvious. And yeah, but actually it's really complex, because we often sort of subconsciously choose a path because we believe it's what's expected of us. We choose it because, you know, someone else, or even because we think that we'll, you know, probably be good at it. We might choose it because we seek certain sort of financial incentives or career milestones. And, you know, I'm not here to suggest that any of those aspects are unimportant, or that they frankly did not play a part in my decision-making process over the years. But the real reason that I finally gravitated towards my current area of practice was really because it aligned most with my personality and my interests. So, you know, coming to what a disability lawyer does, is basically we're defending those individuals, or we are advocating for those individuals whose disability benefits have been denied by insurance companies. And so we are litigating against large insurance companies in order to, present our clients' cases. And so on a daily basis, I'm analyzing medical information, which is an aspect of my job I absolutely love. I think the only reason I didn't become a doctor at the end of the day was because I hate math and I also hate blood. And so, those two combinations don't make for a very good doctor. So I still get to pursue my interest in medical issues. And early on in my practice, medical malpractice was a big area for me, but I'm no longer doing medical malpractice, but what I am doing now is really analyzing medical records in order to substantiate a claim for disability. So I have seen, medical records that deal with all sorts of medical conditions, rare conditions, and the most fascinating medical records that you can possibly imagine. I also engage in contract interpretation and analysis. I critique decision-making processes that are engaged in by the insurance company. And I'm looking for things like, breaches of good faith by insurance companies. I'm looking for errors that may have been made in the adjudication process. And I'm also obviously, applying legal principles to factual circumstances. And I'm advocating for clients on a daily basis, whether it's written advocacy or oral advocacy. And, that takes place in different forums. Most often I am in mediation, which is the land of lawyers these days, because getting into a trial and getting into a courtroom these days is extremely rare, which is most unfortunate. But, the land of mediation also allows for advocacy and sometimes very effective advocacy. And what it really does is it allows for storytelling, which is a very powerful medium and a very, very effective way to introduce advocacy and to deal with, issues that your client may be facing. So, mediation is a great process for that. And, a lot of what I've just discussed with you and explained to you sort of can be found in several areas of law. So really, like, what is it that drew me to disability law specifically? And the thing that drew me to disability law specifically is really sort of the cathartic and transformative nature of the process. So, when clients first come and see me, as I'm sure you can imagine, they're in a very, very dark place. They're typically physically and mentally unwell. They've just lost their, sole source of income, their disability benefits. They might be on the verge of losing their homes, everything they've worked for their entire lives. They're often harassed relentlessly by the insurance company. They might be harassed by their employers. They've lost confidence in themselves, in the system. Their relationships are breaking down due to, multiple stressors that they're facing. And so, also they might be traumatized by adverse events that they've experienced. They might have trust issues. And so for me, gaining a client's trust and helping them navigate through the litigation process while still ensuring that they're sort of maintaining their dignity, their autonomy, their mental health, that is the reason I love the work that I do, because, empowering clients in the process and moving them towards an acceptance of the final outcome of the litigation is extremely gratifying. And I personally, I love my role as an advocate, but I also have a pseudo role as a social worker. And I know a lot of people would hate that and they would never want to do that. But again, it comes down to, what are your interests? What do you enjoy? What gives you meaning? So I always say, when you're deciding on your career path in law in Canada, do not forget the importance of meaning. Meaning is so important. Finding your meaning is what, for me, ensures the longevity in a legal career. And a lot of people, end up leaving a career in law because of the demands, because of the time that's involved in the practice of law and the intensity of the practice. But I feel like if you find something that's congruent with you as a person, that fits your values and that embodies, who you are intrinsically, then you have a chance at longevity. So, for me, there are a couple of other things, and I've been doing this now for 20 years. So I think I can speak a little bit to longevity. I'll speak to me in another 20 years, but like for now, I think I can speak a little bit to it. So, some of the things that I've kind of learned the hard way is learn to be your own gatekeeper. So what do I mean by that? Honestly, as a foreign trained lawyer, I've always felt the need to play catch up. I've always felt the need to kind of work harder, work longer than others, because I felt like I have to prove my credentials. I have to prove that I'm, competing with you and I'm entitled to be here and I have just as much, ability and skill set and expertise as anybody else. And while this can be an asset and, it can be something that can be positively viewed, it can also be something that can be detrimental. Because if you don't set limits and you don't set boundaries, there's a natural tendency for those that are giving you work to keep giving you more and more work until you sort of become overwhelmed. So over the years, I've learned to become a gatekeeper, learning to delegate, learning to communicate when you're overloaded. And again, like learning to distinguish between showing enthusiasm and overcompensating. It's really, really important. And then, the second thing sort of comes down to, again, the meaning aspect, which is ensure that your work environment is a good fit, because if it isn't, it can really be problematic. And honestly, do not be afraid to make a change. Remaining in the same place doesn't necessarily mean that you're advancing or growing, even though the powers that be are telling you that you are. Sometimes the truth is people get used to playing a certain role, and there might be hierarchies in the place that you're working that may never shift. And honestly, sort of as an international lawyer and as international lawyers, I feel like we're at an advantage because we've made the biggest shift possible. We've uprooted our entire lives and we've started again in a whole new place. So, change is not as scary as it seems. And I'm a firm believer in change and in growth. And even for me, when I feel like I'm reaching a point in my career where I'm plateauing, I have to find a way to challenge myself, which again, leads me sort of to reinforcing that idea of longevity. Challenge yourself, don't let yourself plateau. And so 12 months ago, and I can't believe it's almost a year, I kind of took a giant leap. So at the time I was working at a leading disability firm, and I had been working there for about 6 years, and I had been working for another law firm, another disability firm, for about 10 years before that. And in the 6 years that I had worked for my last firm, I had helped build up the firm's long-term disability practice, and I'd invested a lot of energy and time and effort into that. And last year, this time, my disability practice was thriving. I had reached a high, financially, professionally, all sorts of things that I'd sort of felt were, my aspirations and my goals. But honestly, despite the fact that I was pursuing an area of law that I was really passionate about and things were going really well, I felt like something was missing and I didn't really know what it was. And so at that point I said, okay, you know what? You're plateauing, something's missing, you need to make a change. So on December 16th, of last year, I know it's kind of scary to think it's like only been 12 months, I joined the partnership that I'm in right now. And actually I had worked with my law partners before. We had worked together at the law practice that I had worked at before my last law practice. And so I knew them quite well. I knew that our interests and our values aligned. But, I think what was so great about this move is we sort of wanted to create a law firm that was a response to sort of the traditional and often, negative experiences that people have of lawyers and law firms in general, right? Which is really awful to hear. When you're a lawyer and that your goal in life is really, to pursue positive things and you want to help people, then people say, ugh, lawyers, you're kind of so devastated when you hear something like that. But we wanted to make, a conscientious effort to create a law firm that would be perceived as, a positive place where people could come to seek support. We wanted the general public to sort of experience lawyers and experience litigation in a much more positive way. And so we've sort of tried to achieve that in various ways. We communicate with our clients what our strategies are and what our plan is for them going forward, what we hope to achieve. We want to make them, integral partners in the process of litigation. And we want to empower them because we think, that's a critical component, because litigation can be, inherently it can be disempowering in its nature. And so we want to be able to empower people. We want to use and harness emotional intelligence because we think it's something that does give us a competitive edge. And honestly, we believe, injecting humanity into lawyer-client interactions doesn't detract from professionalism. Often people feel that you have to have this sort of barrier between yourself and the client. You can't connect with the client. You have to be this elusive figure that, doesn't really show any empathy. But honestly, vigorous advocacy and empathy can coexist, and very effectively. So yes, starting a business on the eve of a pandemic has been an interesting process, to say the least. And again, a bittersweet moment, but really what you're doing, you're moving from a position where your income is always secure. And then you're moving to a position where you are now the individual who's responsible for rainmaking. And it involves a huge mind shift. You have to be willing to accept discomfort as you grow and you build. And practicing law is very different from running a business. And again, the learning curve is extremely steep, but very rewarding. So, ownership of a business comes with the ability to shape the culture of your business, to create the environment that you feel, is most conducive to productivity, to success, and to ensure that you sort of remain true to your core values. You can focus on the things you want to focus on. For us, many of our clients are marginalized due to their disabilities. They face, additional oppression because of gender identity issues, racial identity, ethnic, sexual orientation, and so on and so on and so on. And, we feel our role as disability advocates is to provide a voice for our clients and to allow them an opportunity to be able to express the things that they haven't been able to express for so long. And also, for me, ownership means the freedom to mentor others and to pursue the interests and causes that I feel are so important to me professionally and personally. So I've always loved mentoring, and I've always loved participating in access to justice initiatives. And right now I have the ability to, to devote more time to those passions and initiatives. And I'm delighted to say that 3 weeks ago, I hired an NCA student who's an aspiring lawyer, and she studied in India. She's been working in retail while sort of trying to break into the legal market. And when I broke the news to her that we decided to hire her, she was so excited by the opportunity. And honestly, it was such a wonderful reminder as to how I felt, 20 years ago, almost to the day, when I started my first job and I embarked on my, career as an internationally trained lawyer in Canada. So that's my very long story, but that's, where I started and where I am right now.
And what a story. And looking at all of the comments coming in, an incredibly relatable story even 20 years later, which is reassuring and also incredibly disappointing at the same way. That 20 years has passed, and as an industry, we are still in a very similar position. So it's kind of depressing a little bit in that sense, but also it's so nice to see that despite all the challenges that you had, you have built an incredibly successful career, by the sounds of it, and an incredibly rewarding career for you personally as well, which I'm sure from your story is the most important part for you as well.
Absolutely. And I think that's what's, so important about sharing what I'm sharing with you today is, no story is without its obstacles. No one is going through anything that really is any different. But one thing that is very different, and I cannot tell you how valuable this is, and that is the resources that you have in someone like Siobhan and this sort of global community of internationally trained lawyers, the NCA community. We did not have that when we first came to Canada. I felt like a lone ranger, a pioneer. I knew nothing. I knew no one. And so I think as much as things have sort of stayed the same, I think a lot has changed, because having a community, having a support system, having, individuals who are going through the same experience is so incredibly valuable. I cannot tell you.
Oh, absolutely. This community didn't exist when I was going through this process, even like 5 years ago, 6 years ago. So it's incredible to be part of this community and to cheer everybody on. And I got a message this morning actually from one of our community to say that she had landed a position today as an articling student. So for anyone who's still looking for positions out there, they are coming, they are appearing. Just keep going, because I'm getting those stories almost daily now from our community. So people are getting hired. Don't worry. Keep pushing. Don't give up. Don't give up. But I'm going to try and hand this over very quickly to everybody on the call today. If you have a question, raise your hand, put it in the chat box. I'm going to ask one question whilst you all think about what your question is going to be, and have time to like type it in. But Leanne, we were talking at the beginning, just as everybody was joining us, and I was saying that personally for me, I don't do private client work because I feel like I would struggle to separate the emotions that comes with dealing with individuals, especially individuals who are incredibly stressed at the time when they're coming to see you, understandably, because this is like one of the most traumatic moments of an already possibly very traumatic life that they're going through for a number of different reasons. But how do you deal with that yourself? Like, how have you found ways to cope with that mechanism and not take it all home or internalize it all the time?
So, I am human, surprisingly, which does mean that, there are days where I do feel overwhelmed. And, that happened to me earlier this year when I lost a client to suicide. It was a devastating experience, and it took me a while to reset because honestly, at the back of my mind, I sort of kept saying, was there anything I was missing? Were there signs that I could have picked up on? Could I have helped him more? Could I have done something? And it really played on my mind for such a long time. And, still to this day it does. So there are days where it is for you as a lawyer, it is overwhelming. But I find the thing that helps me the most is really trying to sort of deeply understand where clients are coming from. So when I am gauging their reactions and I am interacting with them, as a human being, you're often wanting to sort of react to clients' emotions. You want to respond in a certain way. But what I've learned to do is really try to understand where clients are coming from when they are communicating with me. And so when they are very reactive or very distressed or very emotional, trying to understand where they're coming from and just being a sounding board and a person of reassurance for them sometimes can be so valuable to the client. And you don't realize even, for yourself as a lawyer, what an important role sometimes you are playing in that process. And also knowing that at the end of the day, even though all these clients are in a very, very dark place in their lives, I think the thing that brings me peace and comfort and enables me to do what I do is that I know I am going to help them. I know that what I am going to do, and I'm not here thinking I'm doing all these magical things and I'm changing people's lives. I'm not a magician, and I really can't do as many of the things as I would like to do. But because I've been through this process so many times and I've taken clients from a very sort of desperate, dark place to a point where they reach a resolution in their file and they have a settlement and they have closure and they're moving forward with their lives, I know that I have developed the ability to move them through that process. And so that brings me comfort, and that enables me essentially to sort of sit with the emotions that are typically experienced. And the other thing I say is, don't deflect those emotions. It's okay to feel those emotions. It's what makes us human. It's what makes us good at our jobs. Because if we're automatons who have no emotions, who have no empathy, we may as well be replaced by computers. Because what's the point, right? So embrace it, use it to enable you to assist the client to the best of your abilities.
Fantastic. I like that. Don't deflect the emotion. Allow yourself to feel it. Very good. Param, you have a question. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask?
Yep, sure. Thank you, Siobhan. Thank you, Leanne, for this wonderful session. And I really like that comment of yours, like, you need to relate and empathize instead of, just trying to be that robotic human being. That is so true. I think that builds trust. And from trust, you can generate so many wonderful things from there on. So yeah, thank you for that.
Absolutely. And I think that's, so critical to what we do as lawyers. Building trust is probably the most essential element that we can, ever achieve in dealing with our clients. Whether you're a corporate lawyer or a civil litigator or a criminal lawyer, having a client that trusts you means having a client that will cooperate with you, that will give you instructions, and will result in, a successful outcome for you and the client at the end of the day, because the client knows that you are acting in their best interest. So trust is critical.
Yep, thank you. And coming to my question, I would like to know, like, does disability law practice interplay with the employment law? If yes, how much and how often?
Yes, there's a very long answer to that question, but I'll try to abbreviate it. We do frequently find an intersection between disability and employment because, sometimes we have scenarios where individuals are seeking assistance because they are on the verge of losing their employment. And it might be because they are struggling with their physical and mental health and can't do their job. So we might find that they might come and see us for an employment issue, but really it's a disability issue. And then we also find that a lot of our clients who are on disability may end up with, employment issues because they are unable to go back, and so their employer terminates them, or there might be a frustration of contract, and so on and so forth. And then we also have very interesting issues where it's kind of gray. And I was speaking to a lady today who was so frustrated because she didn't know if she had an issue that was an accommodations issue or whether it was a disability issue, and she didn't know what direction to go. Should she force her employer to accommodate her, or should she go on disability because she wasn't able to do her job? So there's a huge intersection sometimes, and that's a really good question, because actually I find in disability law, I'm dealing with a lot of different aspects of the law. So I'm dealing with, as I said, I'm dealing with litigation, I'm dealing with employment issues, I'm dealing with contractual interpretation. I might be dealing with commercial issues because I'm looking at income tax returns to figure out, and incorporation issues and running a business because I'm trying to figure out income. I might be doing, a forensic accounting analysis of someone's income generation. So there's so many aspects and elements of different areas of the law. I might be dealing with someone who has family law issues, not that I would do those myself, but there's all sorts of aspects and areas of the law that may come into what I actually do.
Wow, awesome. Thank you for the answer. Does that mean you have to have expertise on all those areas as well, or do you, like, in practice, get help from, like, in different law firm, or how does that actually go in real life?
So I always say, if you have a brain injury, you're not going to go to an orthopedic surgeon for surgery. And so basically, there are certain areas that I am comfortable in because I have, practiced in those areas, or they have been tangential to my practice area, and so I've developed a knowledge in those areas. But if a client is going to approach me for something that maybe I have some knowledge of, but I don't feel entirely comfortable in that area, I'm going to refer them to somebody else. Reason being, you do not want to engage in an area that you are not very comfortable in, especially when it's something that could potentially have detrimental consequences for the client. Now, there's two things to bear in mind here. I am not suggesting that you don't take on new areas of the law, but if you decide to do that, make sure that you're being mentored. Make sure that you're reaching out to somebody who does have expertise in the area. And that is a very, very important thing that I have learned over the years, because initially when I started out as a lawyer, I always felt perhaps a little uncomfortable reaching out to more senior individuals that had the expertise, because I sort of felt, why are they going to want to hear from me? Who am I? Why will they spend their time talking to me? But truth be told, having reached a point in my journey where I have been practicing now in disability law for a period of time, I love it when people reach out to me and ask questions and ask for help, because everybody has to start somewhere. And if I have the ability to help people and guide people through the process, absolutely, why not? So if you are engaging in, a newish practice area that you're not familiar with, don't go at it alone. Make sure that you do have help, that you do have resources, that you are getting mentoring. But for me, for my comfort level, I've chosen to pursue a certain path. And so if I do find myself encountering other areas of the law, I will likely refer those individuals to my network of people who in turn refer clients to me. So again, it's sort of a symbiotic, mutually beneficial scenario, and it helps to build your network and it helps to grow, your referral basis. So there's benefits to all of that too.
Awesome. And I like it. That's, I guess, the partner mindset now, right?
Exactly. Yes, to pivot, right?
Thank you for lovely answers. Awesome. Thanks.
Thanks for your question, Param. And a perfect segue actually into Oran's question. Oran, do you want to ask your question?
Sure, Leanne. Oh, I just wanted to make a quick comment. So I worked as a law clerk for a number of years before going to law school in a plaintiff firm in Toronto. And we had a travel insurance claim that we haven't, never dealt with before. But the Ontario Travel Lawyers Association, they would give seminars and they would give binders and so forth. So I just picked up a binder off the shelf that said travel insurance on it. And then, we drafted a claim and we developed a theory, based on that. So if those out there that are going into the plaintiff practice, if there's a Provincial Travel Lawyers Association, sometimes they give great seminars on that. So just wanted to follow up on that comment. But my question was also, can you talk a little bit about the benefits of also like networking with other internationally trained students and lawyers when it comes to kind of building a referral network?
I think networking with everyone is really the goal at the end of the day. But I think that, internationally trained lawyers have a unique experience in that we sort of come from a different frame of reference. And so the benefit of networking with one another, I think, really provides us with an advantage, because what we're doing essentially is we're sharing experiences, but also we're expanding each other's networks, because we don't have the same network base as lawyers who have perhaps grown up in Canada, who've studied in Canada. And so what I find is, if I'm networking, I find I might have an international lawyer sort of reach out to me to say, I've had a shared experience with you. And then we sort of connect on LinkedIn. And the most important thing about those experiences is that they're relatable, right? So reaching out to someone who's gone through the same things that you have gone through, who's perhaps in the same position that you are in, can create, I think, a stronger connection. And when you've personally connected with someone who's sort of been through the same things as you have, that enhances your referral, because in essence, okay, I know this person has been through the NCA process. I know what the NCA process is. I know they've trained in a different country, and I know that their expertise may be, just as good, if not slightly different from a Canadian-based lawyer, but they have a lot to add. So, I might find that perhaps I want to refer one of my clients to somebody that has a more sort of international view, because my client comes from a different country, is a new immigrant, and they would feel more comfortable with someone that has a shared experience. So there's so many layers to that I think are so important. And having, a forum to network with other internationally trained lawyers is so, so valuable, from so many levels that I'm like trying to throw everything into my answer, but it's really, with, engaging with each other, being able to refer clients who would need the resources that we can give, and just coming from that shared experience, which is so critical.
I appreciate that, Leanne. Thank you.
And touching on your OTLA point, there are a lot of resources out there that are available for individuals who are just starting out. It doesn't only have to be someone that you sort of reach out to on a personal level. There are so many organizations. There is so much CLE and CPD and webinars. And now more than ever, there are so many opportunities to sort of educate yourself. And, you know, I never want to discourage anyone from taking on a new area of law or engaging in, you know, a new practice area. My only sort of cautionary tale is make sure that if you are doing so, that you are in a position where you have the knowledge. So, you know, don't go into something without any knowledge, but wherever you get your knowledge from is up to you, and the resources are, honestly, they're endless.
That's such a good point. And that's where your network becomes part of that support network as well, because it's not just a referral network both ways, but they could also be the people where you pick up the phone and you're like, hey, you know, I got this question. I just want to run something past you because this is your expertise. And then you can then figure out if this is a bigger question that really needs an expert in that area, or if it's something you could maybe just give like a very short answer to and it satisfies that question. But it's knowing your boundaries, which I think is something that the Law Society is really keen on. It comes up in the PR exam, is know your boundaries. And that's challenging because, as you know, especially as Leanne was saying earlier on, we feel like we need to overachieve. Especially as ITLs, we need to produce more, we need to do better than everybody else. And particularly as a woman, I find it very hard to say no. And that's not just for all women, but myself as a woman, I find it very hard to say no. So I'm like, okay, I can take that on, but maybe I'm pushing my boundaries a little bit too far sometimes. So it's a really good point. Check with other people, have a boundary there with somebody on that one. Leanne, tonight was absolutely fantastic. Thank you so much. Oren, do you have a follow-up question?
Thank you so much for having me. It's wonderful to be here.
Yeah, Oren, go for it. Add in your last bit.
Oh, I just wanted to make one more point. So, you know, just working in that PI industry, it gets very, very technical sometimes, right? And what often happens is, even when it comes to like referring to experts and getting expert reports, sometimes it's, you know, you may not know like an expert in a particular area where you may need an expert report. And if you're picking up the phone and calling someone that has worked with an expert before and looking at the results that they were able to obtain for another client with a very similar issue, could be very, very helpful as well. Yes,
absolutely. Excellent point. And you know, at the end of the day, we can always sort of grow and learn from one another. And, you know, I found over the years, there's great value in actually speaking with people about your cases. So, you know, if you're working in a firm or you have colleagues that you sort of share information with, that can be invaluable because, you know, when we're going through law school, everything's sort of very, you know, technical, and it's very sort of, I want to use the word artificial. I don't know if that's the correct terminology, but once you have sort of real life experiences that you're dealing with, it is so valuable to engage in conversation. You know, whether it is to find out somebody else's perspective on how they see the case, that can add so much value to the way you're going to present things. And so my partners and I, actually, we love it. Every Friday we have a little sort of case session discussion where we take our, you know, most challenging, most difficult files, and we sort of create like a pseudo focus group where we sort of present our arguments on the case, and we have input from one another, and you know, we're often, you know, criticizing one another's arguments like you would in a, you know, in a motion, and it's the most sort of beneficial part of the week sometimes, because sometimes you think, even as a lawyer that's been doing, you know, the same thing for many, many years, you sort of think that you've thought of everything, you know everything, you know. I firmly believe you never know anything. You are always learning and you're always growing, and you have to have that mindset. But the most important thing I think is what you can learn from other people, no matter what stage you are at. And, you know, sometimes it's very difficult as a, you know, as a new lawyer in a firm, you sort of feel like you can't have these conversations because maybe it will be sort of perceived as you don't, you know, you're looking for help and you don't really know what you're doing. But honestly, I can tell you that I find it so refreshing when I have a young, you know, candidate or lawyer or student who sort of comes to me and wants to engage with me about a problem, about an issue, is inquisitive, is asking questions. That is so important, because what it shows me is not that this person doesn't have knowledge. It shows me that this person wants to learn, that this person wants to grow, and that this person cares about what they're doing. And that is more valuable than anything else. And honestly, I tell, you know, we mentor some co-op students, we mentor law students, and I say to everybody, ask questions. Show that you are engaging with the information. Show that you want to learn more. Show that you've done some research, you have some understanding, but these are your thoughts, these are your ideas. What do you think about this? It's so refreshing when we have those conversations, and they're not going to be perceived in a negative way. They're going, I think, at least from my end, I think they're going to be perceived very positively, because it really shows a mindset that's so important. And that's, the growth mindset that we all sort of aspire to.
That's a great point. I think that goes to some of the comments that we're getting in the chat right now. That really goes to helping you, or one of the criteria you should be looking for when finding the right fit, which Leanne talked about earlier on. When you're looking for firms and you're applying to firms, that's one of the things to maybe take into consideration, is the fit of the firm. So if your desire is to work in a firm such as Leanne's style of firm, where it seems to be very collaborative and they have roundtable discussions and they bounce ideas off one another, then that's the type of firm you should be looking for. And those are the type of questions you should be asking when you're looking for a firm, because no one firm has a one-size-fits-all. And this goes very much back to Leanne's story at the beginning, which is about you finding out what is your priority for you and what you want your career to be like and what are your values, and then seeking out those other people who have similar values and similar ideas, and then forging your way forward with those and looking for those opportunities as you progress through your career where you can develop those skills as well. So that was a lovely cycle back to almost the very beginning of your story, Leanne. And Leanne, we are rapidly running out of time. I know it's getting very late on the East Coast, and I'm sure your small people in your house are clamoring for your attention before they go to bed. So
I've locked them out.
Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I've learned a lot. I'm sure everybody else has. I saw lots of heads bobbing and nodding, and it was an incredibly relatable story. And I'm definitely going away with lots of positive ideas that I can implement in my life and my career. So thank you very much for joining us. Everyone, thank you so much for all of your questions. They were fantastic. Once again, absolutely fantastic. Make sure you're following Leanne on LinkedIn. She posts some fantastic content, which is really good mentoring advice, no matter what practice area you want to work in. So you can find her on LinkedIn. Next week is our last week for Virtual Mentor Office Hours for the year. Boo! But it's a celebration. We are going to celebrate all of you. We are going to celebrate your big wins this year, your small wins, your lack of wins, whatever. If all you did this year was get out of bed and join us, we're going to celebrate that. So bring your favorite beverage, whatever it is, find a festive hat or a novelty sweater, and we're going to celebrate all of you and your wins this year, because I know there are lots and lots and lots out there. And fingers crossed, we will be celebrating all of your final exam results. Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed they're coming.
Good luck to everybody. And Siobhan, thank you so much for having me today. It was so wonderful to be here. I wish everybody the best of luck. And honestly, if anybody ever wishes to reach out to me, feel free anytime.
Thank you very much, Leanne. It was absolutely our pleasure to have you join us tonight. Everyone, have a lovely rest of your week, and we'll see you all soon.
Take care.
Thank you so much.